few words because I'm very honored and pleased to introduce you someone who is an important reference for my research path and my practice in this world of listening. Thanks to Elena, also we got to understand that listening is not a practice of a neutral person who organizes sounds and can freely move around in the space, but listening is listenings on the plural. So I just want to say something about Nina's biography. Nina Eidsheim is an artist, a vocalist, and writer who works in and through voice, race, words, concepts, listening, and materiality. Some of this work is done through the UCLA practice-based experimental epistemology research peer lab. An experimental research lab Eidsheim founded and directs, dedicated to decolonizing data, methodology, and analysis, and in through the multisensory creative practices. The author of Sensing Sounds, Singing and Listening as Vibrational Practice, and The Race of Sound, Listening, Timbre, and Vocality in the African American Music. She co-edits the Refiguring American Music book series for Duke University Press. Eidsheim is professor of musicology at the University of California, Los Angeles. So, 1,000 ways home, a listening kit, and I leave the floor to Nina. Do you prefer to... Okay, here? Just here? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Gaia.
Nina, can you try this?
Okay, yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for the invitation, Gaia, Luca, Anna, who's done so much to coordinate everything, Francesca, and of course, the Massimo, who has created the work that we have been engaging with today, and many of you for weeks and months. I have one simple thesis for today's talk or participatory event, and that is, and I think it relates to what Elena was saying, although I could only understand some words here and there. We hear what has been heard for us before. We only hear what has been heard for us before. So I want to talk about that on two different levels. And then I would like for us to, as Massimo is doing in his work, try to work and play with that and see if we can expand it. So on the first level, we hear what has been heard for us before, in that, of course, sound is energy. Sound is energy transmitted, transducted through material. And we, as humans, have created a kind of vibrational practice around that to determine when we think something is a sound versus when we think something is dance or architecture or visual arts. So we have created a kind of boundary around certain kind of material practices that we consider sound. Yeah, you're welcome. There are chairs here. If you want to come up, there's sun here, but maybe more comfortable in the shade. So, so first of all, like I was saying, we're living in this material world, and energy is being transmitted through it. And we have, as a culture, made decisions of when that is considered sound, when it's considered music, when it's an object or a dance, for instance. That's the first kind of big cut, big decision that we have made. And then we hear according to those rules. So that's the first kind of evidence for that we hear what has already been heard for us. On the second level, we both come to voice and we hear what we have been exposed to. So even a newborn that was just born 1 second ago has already been induced into a sonic culture. They have already been exposed to the voice of the woman or the person who carried them, and they recognize those sound patterns distinctly from other sound patterns. So they, in a way, recognize the language, even though they don't know the linguistic meaning of that language. They can distinguish and say, I know this language versus another language. So even the newborn is already encultured into sound. We learn what is music versus noise. We learn what is in tune versus out of tune. We learn what are good sounds and bad sounds. We learn how we are vocalizing in good ways and bad ways, how we should speak inside versus how we should speak outside. We learn what to listen for, pay attention, versus don't hear this. This is not for your ears. So anything we hear has been taught to us. It's an attentional schema has been given us. And this kind of attentional schema creates a kind of feedback loop. So we create a whole musical and material culture around that. So if we value certain sounds, we're going to try to reproduce and optimize for those kinds of sounds. So we can think about acoustical spaces, concert spaces, for instance. Those are optimized for a certain kind of music. We can think about all the technology that goes into sound is optimized for a certain kind of sound making. We can think about instruments. They're also optimized for a certain kind of sound making, for a certain type of musical sonic schema, certain scales, for instance. So it becomes, again, this kind of feedback loop. What we have been taught to listen for, we create the optimal situation to make so we can hear it again, and then we get used to hearing those kinds of sounds. So those are the sounds we will be hearing. This has really big consequences, not just in terms of scalar schemas, but we also listen for that in terms of what's human, what's non-human, which humans are worthwhile to listen to, which humans are not worthwhile to listen for. We create imaginary schemes around race, around gender, in terms of these sonorosities. And so these kinds of rehearing what we already heard is what creates differences among us and is the kind of basis for the difference that we create policies around and we act out in our everyday life. So if we can only hear what has been heard for us, how are we stuck in that is the big question. That's the kind of question that would be posed to a kind of that certain kind of thesis. And we can point to many artists who are trying to expand that, to kind of start with the reference point that we share and to move from that place. Pauline Oliveros, who is a big reference point for this exhibition, has of course created a whole practice, deep listening, to try to really hear things anew or hear something in between that maybe hasn't been heard before. And I would say this exhibition itself is this piece, this work, this series of pieces are doing something very similar. For me and for my family, there are so many reference points in this piece. I grew up with a local church, a Protestant church, where I would hear the organ every Sunday. the bus driver to my school, his name, we all called him, and he was an old man when he drove the bus for us, we called him Oscar Pump, because of pumping, because when he was a child, he was the person who had to pump the organ, and that was his nickname from he was 6 years old, and still when he was 60, when I knew him, his name was still Oscar Pump, because of the centrality of the organ. My son's grandfather was an organist, and his father was also an organist when he was a child. So we have this long tradition of interacting with organs. Yet when we come into this space, it's both the recognition of the organ and the estrangement. So something we know very, very well has been made new to us, and we don't know how to hear. And to me, even though it's very, very hot here, that's the kind of experience that gives me chills. Like, how often are we in those kinds of situations where we don't know what to do with ourselves, when our sensorium, which has been so entrained into these listening schemas, doesn't know how to react. It doesn't have a instantaneous or automatic reaction anymore. So that's, I think, to me, it's one of the gifts I keep on giving from this kind of work, that somebody is working with artisanal workers who really probably have been building organs for their entire lives, and of course, working with generations of knowledge, yet is able to twist it to create something slightly new. So it's we can hold on to the reference point, but at the same time, we can tilt our ear or stop and ask ourselves, how do I listen now? And I think there's so few moments in life when we stop and actually ask ourselves how to meet that encounter, how to engage in that encounter. So in thinking about today and this space and being with all of you together, I didn't know that I would have such a strong reaction because I hadn't been here yet. But I was thinking about how can we together maybe try to hear a sound that we know very well in a different way. So I prepared something for you. Maybe. So we're going to make a little book together. So I don't know how many of you have studied music theory or learned about music some kind of way in primary school or high school or conservatory. I know some people here who have. But this is going to be your own music theory book. I have instructions. You're going to share those instructions. Har du gitt alle borti der? So you can read in the instructions how to do it, but I found that for some it might be a little bit hard still. But it's something very, very special I found about actually making something. So if you have your sheet, I can just go over it quickly and then you can refer to the instructions if you need to later. You have your sheet. You're going to fold it in the middle. And then you fold it again twice. Then you fold it like this. And then when you have this fold, you're going to get this pair of scissors and you're going to cut it. Once you have your book, I ask you to read the prompts and write your own music theory or your own sound or listening theory by answering the questions. Yes, and there should be pencils coming around. if you already have a pen, just indicate that. Length of time to complete it. Some might have finished it in 2 minutes. Some might not have finished the first question. As you saw, the questions can be very metaphorical. They don't have to be so concrete. It's about what we have been taught to listen and what we have been taught to filter out and not pay attention to. That could be in terms of so-called good sounds, bad sounds. It can be also in terms of who we respect, who we listen to when they speak versus who we don't listen to, whose music we respect versus whose music we don't respect. It goes really to any of the dimensions that we use sound and listening to navigate through the world. So this is because so much of what we hear has been given us. Like I started out saying, we hear what has been heard for us already. I thought, especially with having been able to hear something slightly differently with Massimo's piece here, that it would be nice to return to a sound from childhood and maybe hear that sound in a different way. The initial question, growing up, what were you told not to hear? What were you told not to pay attention to? What were you told to ignore? What were you told to pretend not existed? You could exchange this question with any question. It could be about, very specifically about sound or music. It could be about anything else too in the world. You could really move it towards visual art, towards dance, any of the art forms, but also towards money. Like how have you been told to pay attention, not pay attention to money? What is the value of money for you? You can really move this question in any direction. And the point is to try to see it in a different way, to experience it in a different way. And as we know, we can really experience the world in 1,000 and more ways. So I'm hoping that this new kind of little book of theory for you, that you can take it home and you can work with it in your own way. Please adapt it as you see fit. And if you visit this space again, and of course we're also experiencing the piece right here together with the cicadas. How can we also hear that piece anew is what this little primer was about. So thank you so much for letting me work with your piece, Massimo. Thank you so much, Gaia, for letting me be here.